going to be about 4 DOI students in this period, so we're going to have over 20, we're going to have like 24 people in here. Going to be a little crowded. Give me 1 second, I need a. Let's go. So, as luck would have it, I have a gift for you. That was a little scary. Okay. So I have a gift, and I know what you're thinking. I should really quit giving. I give and I get. I won't quit. I'm here for you. Only you. My gift is not for you. It's a DBQ. Clear your desk. I'm not kidding about the DBQ. So next week's going to have it, because we have short periods, I was going to give you the documents in advance. And then I thought about it, well, I won't see you again until next Monday. So even though we haven't quite gotten to this material yet, my assumption is you know it so well, you're going to do it anyway, correct? It's an exciting DBQ for your dining and or dancing entertainment. What a, oh, so close. Dive! You get it? Okay. All right. So it's about the ratification of the Treaty of Versailles. And 2 things. First off, since we have short periods, we only have 42-minute periods still, we're not going to have time to write a full DBQ. So I'm going to give you time to organize it. And you're going to organize it like a 5-paragraph essay with 3 body paragraphs. In each of those body paragraphs, you have to use 2 documents. In your outline, you must show a full organization for a 5-paragraph essay. But when we write it in class next week, and I'm not sure what day, it'll be just a 4-paragraph essay for time reasons. So you'll have to do 2 body paragraphs, or just pick two of your 3 body paragraphs. Does that make sense? Secondly, as I understand it right now, we're going to have the test on the first day, which will be handwritten for the AP exam, and that's going to be like May 8th or May 9th. But the College Board has left it open that for whatever reason you want to wait to the next one, then you do that one on your computer, and that's typed. And I'll give you about 8 more days to prepare, which that's a big deal. And so if you want to do the first one, you want to handwrite it, you're more comfortable doing that, then you will handwrite this DBQ. And I'll let you know next week exactly how we'll do this, but if you want to wait and do the exam 8 days later and do the one on your computer, then you'll type. So start thinking about it now. Would you rather handwrite essays? When you handwrite, there's little doubt, it's pretty much known that there's less chance you'll forget this. It just, you won't forget as much. Handwriting too, your hand gets incredibly tired. Typing, if you're comfortable typing, your hand doesn't get near as tired. Yes.
What's the difference between
The big differences?
Yeah.
Okay, the big difference is on the handwritten one, you have 3 short answer questions. Remember, each short answer question is 3 short IDs. So that's 9 total short IDs, but 3 sentence ones. So not that long. They're pretty short. And then a long essay, another 5-paragraph essay. Everyone's got to do DBQ, regardless. If you do the one on the computer, you have 6 short answer questions, but no long essay. I see advantages of all. I see advantages. It's the same basic writing format. You have a little bit more. The essay, you have a choice. All right. Next, in that packet I gave you on World War I, there are 2. Do I have it here? No, it's bold one. Well, just imagine I was holding that packet. But there are 2. You don't need it out right now. But there are 2 readings that have on the Paris peace talks and the ratification map. And they will help you immensely for something called the DBQ. especially the ratification map. So over the next week, please read that. And also on your own, go back and look through it. I'll review it again, but go back and look through how to write a DBQ. I gave you documentation, I gave you examples, all that material. I think I also am going to post it for tomorrow for class. We always post every day. I'll post all that stuff on there. And for those of you who are DOI, I will post this tomorrow too. D-Day, we'll get this on there. Sound good? So this is, you have to know the Treaty of Versailles, but it's about the ratification battle. Will the United States get 2/3 of the Senate to ratify it? Spoiler alert, no. The U.S. did not. And so, any questions on that? Any questions on the Espionage Act that's due today? Does anybody want to give me their paper copy? Did you turn it in already? We're going to talk a little bit about it today in class. Any questions? Okay, good. Let's go ahead and I'll talk more about it today. So I'll kind of fill in a few blanks and then go through it. I'll go through it a little bit more when I get everybody, and then I go talk about the United States. But we got to finish Total War because this is such a massive deal. Went through the whole idea. Who's the German general who coined the term Total War? Yeah, Erich von Ludendorff. Not Erich von Ludendorff. Erich Ludendorff. He was not a von. A von is a title for nobility. And what? And then what is the term I gave you for long-term goals? See the ant? That's Joe.
That's Joe.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. It's like one I just kind of not messing with you guys. All right. So what is it? The term I gave you for long-term goals. Yeah, strategy, strategic, long-term, and one that would knock out industry, hurt their morale. What's the third one I gave you? Could be anything. Just realized it's I don't know. Could be anything. And don't forget, once you allow, you say that the state's going to do terrorism, you pretty much open the door to almost everything. But now we got to get to why this is such a big deal, when it obviously seems like a pretty big deal already. So I think we got right to here yesterday, didn't we? Did we get to this? From a point of view, nationalists, but don't forget this whole thing about sacrifice. It's to gird your country up to sacrifice. They're going to have to make horrible sacrifices, everything from food shortages and higher prices to family members going off to war, dying, being maimed, chained forever. And so dehumanize them. And the thing, to find them, to find somebody not like us, the enemy. And the problem is, once you gird people up to say there's the enemy, this enemy that we must defeat, and frankly, the enemy could be anyone. Couldn't anybody be helping us or helping the enemy win? I know you look right at the ant. Yeah. Don't blame the ant for your problem. And so, here's an example of how this really drummed up the fear of them, the other. So here's a great American poster. I love this one. So, yeah, it's the Mad Brood. You can see a lot of this as some kind of monster, gorilla, beast, and Europe, poor little Belgium. There's Europe in flames. Now, nobody really believed that there was a monster big enough to cross the Atlantic and attack the United States. It's just reinforcement. But isn't this a clever cartoon? Do you see it? See the club? Culture. So the German culture. And what is it really? An uncivilized brute. And we all know what's going to happen here, or just did happen. And by the way, it says right here, America. If we don't stop them here, they're coming here. So listen, the U.S. Army. Here, another Allied one, same deal. The German brute, blood on his hands, blood smearing through Europe. And if we don't stop them, what will happen? The question mark.
They'll go to the moon.
What?
They're going to go to the moon if we don't stop.
Yeah. We're not sure what's there. Okay, so what country is this for? Actually, it's a dominion. You know what country this is for? Look at the globe. Good guess, but no. So most of the fighting's here, right? But you notice they have the globe turned for what? Exactly. They have the globe turned so you can see Australia. So it's for Australia. So it's still a British colony called the Dominion then, but hundreds of thousands of Australians, or Canadians, or whatever it might be. So I like that one. Yeah, because what else would you put Australia in that map? Sorry, Australia. So with that, and here's the thing, this fear for the other, every single war, every time you start drumming up total war, oh, here's, I almost forgot to show these two more. I like these ones. So that's supposed to represent a U-boat, a submarine, blood on his hands, crush the menace of the seas, an underwater threat, sinking ships. And go tell that to the Marines, implying how angry he is. And I guess he's going to take his coat off and tell the Marines, no, he's going to join. And it says, Huns kill women and children. Onto the Germans. Ah, let's get them. Okay, that one kind of makes me laugh. This was a very popular poster artist. Here's German ones. So, and you, won't you join against the war, basically for civilization? So Germany's doing the same thing, but here's one. We must fight this war to protect Germania, German people. Remember that fake German culture in areas? You see how they draw them? Kind of mythical German family. So just a different version of the same thing. But one thing, once you start emphasizing that we're protecting us, this leads to fear of outsiders. Every war leads to an increase in xenophobia, or xenophobia. I call it's technically both. It should be, I'm going to use the word xenophobia, but for some reason xenophobia came out. And xenophobia is fear of outsiders, fear of foreigners. And every war and drumming up support for it, especially modern war and total war, will lead to a growth of nativism. So here, this is civil war. And here's nativism against Irish and German immigrants. World War I and fear of outside radicals coming to the United States. This is right after the war, implying that these undesirables will come in as a bunch of terrorists. This is after World War I. This is World War II. Precursor to Japanese Internment. And it happens today. During the horrific civil war that's still going on in Syria, this is why the United States cannot allow Syrian refugees escaping that hell because they will be terrorists. And that's from 3 years ago. Every war, every time this happens, especially, this will lead to some sense of fear of the others. And the reason why this is so important is you can't just shut it off. Once you start getting geared up people for war, when the war's over, you can't go like, oh, we're all friends now. No, there's still this anger, the fear, and it has a residue. It has a residue that will last for years. After World War I, there's going to be a massive wave of anti-communist, but also anti-union activity called the Red Scare, and unprecedented attacks on African Americans called the Red Summer. Why was it called Red Summer? That's the color of blood. 1919, 1920. You see a similar thing, the McCarthyism and the Second Red Scare after World War II. So, this fear of the others will provide everything. I just can't emphasize that enough. Others. We start looking for an enemy, we will find the others. And so let's get to a key element here. February 1917. I don't have to talk about it, it was in the book, but February 1917. The Tsar was overthrown. The Tsar was overthrown in Russia. Germany was overjoyed. Now, Russia ended up staying in the war for a few more months, but here's the revolution in February 1917. The Tsar is gone. Was that a victory for Germany? Did Germany cause that rebellion? Was German practices of total war the reason for the Tsar to fall? If you want to break their morale, terrorize, destroy their industry so they change the government, was this Germany's responsibility? And the reason why this is so important, this hit shockwave through the Allies. Oh my God, what if it happens in France, Britain, the United States? What if it happens here? I can't emphasize this enough. And the Germans are thinking twofold. Yay, we won in Russia. And Couldn't it happen here? And so what we're coming to is this important concept. What does winning look like? Or for that matter, what does losing look like? What does it look like? How do you know you're winning? How do you know you're losing? If the enemy's trying to break you, could they succeed? And I'll explain those cartoons in just a second, but they're both cartoons from what people consider to be democracies. I should add, technically no, they weren't democracies. Like the United States is not a democracy per se. In fact, most people couldn't vote. But we thought we were. We called ourselves democracy. So here's the thing. Get back to this concept that I emphasize because people make this mistake all the time. War is political, a political decision. But in a democratic republic, who picks at least most of our political leaders? Voters. There's elections. There's the party in power and an opposition. They can disagree. There's debate. There's dissension. The decision to go to war was made by politicians. And in a democratic republic, they could be removed from office. Everyone got that. There can be people against the war in the opposing party. So, can you allow dissent in a democratic republic during total war? If the opposition party wins, did the enemy just win? During the Civil War, if McClellan would have been elected president in 1864, the South probably would have won. In 1918, the United States, the majority government were Democrats. It's a vote for the Republican, a vote for Germany. Can you allow dissent in a democratic republic? Can you allow political debate? Can people disagree with the government? And so, every country in total war will look at this dissent and say no. They are going to demand, and they called it back then, social unity. Think about conformity. The idea is we want everybody behind the war. And doesn't propaganda fit into this? Nationalism before the war. If you oppose the government, you're helping the enemy. And by the way, you can imagine how politicians are going to use this really quick. You go against me, you're a traitor. Which, by the way, once you start calling people traitors, it's hard to go back and say, hey, let's be friends tomorrow. You can't go back. And yes, this has happened many times in our history, including now. But they demand social unity. So everybody unified. Well, how do you do that? Propaganda is the biggest weapon. But can you allow free speech? Even for, I was going to put the enemy, but even for the enemy or things that might seem to help the enemy, can you allow free speech? Every country, every single country in the war will pass bans on free speech, including the United States. The Espionage Act would be passed that banned free speech. And every country in total war did this. Every single country in World War I did this. Britain, it was the infamous Defense of the Realm Act. With the idea being, if we allow opposition to the government, the enemy wins. Well, if you don't allow dissent or opposition, you no longer have a democratic republic. You have something closer to a dictatorship. And every country in total war does this. And it's no coincidence that after World War I, a man by the name of Benito Mussolini would coin the term totalitarianism, for a totalitarian state. A state that will have total control over its population. And that term directly comes from total war. And in fact, if you want to make a totalitarian state, where the most authoritarian dictatorship you can imagine, what's the first thing you do? Go to war. Operate something like a war, so then you can ban free speech, ban dissent. And then you can say, anybody who goes against me, the government, they're traitors. Have to be arrested. Every single totalitarian state operates like it's a constant war. War equals banning free speech. And so you look at the most monstrous totalitarian states in history, every single one of them have been in a state of constant total war. Every one. So the Soviet Union, after years of civil war, they said, we're going to protect our ultimate socialism by having an awful totalitarian state. It's kind of an amazing little contradiction. But who was their enemy? At first, the fascists. How was Germany able to create a totalitarian state? Their enemy were the communists. And then during the Cold War, that is how the Soviet Union maintained a totalitarian state, and the US kind of did it too. So let's look at these cartoons. These are cartoons in democratic republics. This is France. France is a democratic republic. And here it shows a wounded, brutal, or horribly maimed French soldier. And they essentially are asking, why is this fight? And asking a wealthy French businessman who's getting rich out of wartime contracts. They're getting rich because of the war while the people suffer. Is this normal political discourse, or is this helping the end? Here is in the United States telling people, don't register for this draft. The United States should never have entered the war. Is this normal political discourse about a political decision, which it was, or is this helping the Germans? By the way, when you're in power, what do you think this is doing? Those are traitors. That's what you think. And everybody in power does this. So with that, you have to write this down. This is what you just read, the Espionage Act. So I summed up the very first part of it, but willfully utter, print, write, or publish any disloyal, profane, scurrilous, or abusing language in the about the form of government of the United States, and so on. Wow. But more importantly, can anyone define disloyal, profane, scurrilous, or abusive language? Can anyone define that? Couldn't it be what kind of language? Yes. Could it be anything? Anything somebody you don't like says could be a scurrilous abuse, couldn't it? It could be anything. And who defines this? Who defines this? And this part you have to get down. Who defines this? Who carries out the laws? Who? The executive branch. The executive branch of society. So can't they just arrest anybody they want? So who did they arrest? Anybody they wanted. Could this have happened in states too? Yes. Every state, including Montana, would pass an Espionage Act. Montana would arrest over 250 people. Some for as simple of a statement as saying, I don't like the draft. Boom, you're in jail. This law is pretty amazing, isn't it? And do you think a country would allow this today? It's still on the books. It's still the law. If anybody answered that last question there and said, no, we would never allow this. Sorry, I got bad news for you. You've already allowed it. Because most people are just, oh. Who does this shut up? What kind of people does this keep silent? If you really were a German agent, would they shut you up? If you really want to overthrow the government of the United States, would they shut you up? No! Who does it shut up? Regular people. And get that down. What happens in total war is it just shuts down normal political discourse. It shuts down normal political parties. They just quit talking. It's a 20-year jail sentence, and nobody wants to go to jail. 20-year jail sentence. Heck, 1 day in jail is a long time in jail. Yeah, I can tell you, I did some hard time. I can tell you. No, I don't want to spend a minute in jail, let alone 20 years. That shuts up most people, so one of the most radical. So what happens is, this will shut up normal political talk, but doesn't shut up the radicals. If you were a German spy, would this shut you up? Heck no. Heck, if you were a German spy, you'd be the first one to say, I love America. Right? These kind of laws only do one thing. Shut up your own population. It's the only thing they do. And they're still on the books. And this is the recipe to a dictatorship. That's why total war is the worst thing ever created by mankind. It's going to be not only the excuse for horrific acts, but also the excuse for full authoritarianism. And it's terrifying. By the way, who enforces this? Add one more thing. Every country in total war has to have a very broad and expansive secret police. Secret police. In the United States, World War I, what will come out of World War I? The American secret police. Who's the American secret police? The FBI. That's our secret police. It was created during World War I. And what does secret police mean? We don't know who the secret police is. And there's something else. Also informants. Informants. Informants work great. You reward people for telling on others. Which, by the way, would that be a great way to get rid of somebody you don't like? I heard them say bad things about the draft. They're pro-German. Boom, we're gone. So, for example, I was in class and I said, young man, let's say it's 1918. Next year you're getting drafted. I don't know if that's a good idea. I don't know if this war is a good idea. Am I a traitor?
Yes.
And one of you rats would tell on me. Which one of you rats would do it? Admit it, be a race, wouldn't it? It'd just be a race. You'd be rewarded, we got rid of him, or it would just be, I don't want to do that DBQ. I'm going to tell on him. That would never happen, would it? Of course it would. And you would be rewarded. So the next teacher, they'd have to really watch their mouth. That's how totalitarian states work. And the US will dip into this. Or just about a German-sounding name. So, next part about total war, once you make the decision, now we got to do whatever it takes to win the war, and everybody's an enemy, what is now justifiable? There were weapons going into the 20th century that people thought we would never use. There's a couple of peace agreements in The Hague, Netherlands, to make war more civilized and not so bloody, not target civilians, rules on the high seas so you won't sink ships without warning. As soon as you adopt total war, it's like, well, we have no choice. We have to start doing these things, or our enemy will. So here's one of this new, the only way I think about always like a new rule. Like, we can do it. Gas is a classic example. Poison gas, they've been developing this. They knew about chlorine gas and tear gas, but nobody would do this horrible weapon. But in 1915, what country first used gas? Germany did it first against the Russians, and then later did it against the Canadians and British in Belgium. It's World War, remember? And the first gas was chlorine gas, was lighter in air, so it dissipated pretty fast. These are barrels. And they opened up the barrels, and they thought they're hoping the gas would blow towards the enemy. I think you see a problem immediately with that. And they also have a problem is you're going to tap into the gas. The first time they tried it caused absolute panic and death amongst the Russians and British/Canadians, but the Germans weren't ready to exploit it. And it didn't take long to adapt. They quickly started building gas masks, and gas masks, okay, made it hell on earth. Hot, uncomfortable, can't breathe, but you can survive it. In fact, you know what the first thing they did for the chlorine gas? You're all wearing masks, right? They put a cloth mask, and then to keep the chlorine from coming through, they urinated on it. And that worked. Now, I agree, that's gross. You'll think of two things. Number one, it's better than sucking in chlorine gas. And number two, it's your own urine. Okay? There isn't like one person designated to go on all the mask. Okay, you've been drinking gallons of water, bring your mask in. No, it's yours. So at least think of it that way. But pretty soon they have better masks. Soon, 40% of all artillery rounds are going to be gas shells in both armies. It didn't ever bring the breakthrough. It was never decisive. But the terror, get the gas mask on. Hell on earth. So you look at these are 1918 attacks. Germans attacking through mustard gas. Here's a German throwing this hand grenade they call the potato masher towards the enemies. And you notice the helmets? Here is a German World War I helmet. It's the real deal. It is a German helmet from World War I. Steel, they started wearing these in 1916. Everybody copies these helmets today. The Americans started using this style of helmet in 1980. So helmets we have there are all copies of the German World War I helmet. It's a heavy, thick piece of steel. It's not going to stop a bullet, but it's for the shrapnel. It will protect you from that. And it's uncomfortable, terrible thing. They wore a wool cap and then put this over the top. It's this actually was taken off of a battlefield in Italy in 1945. So the Germans were using World War I helmets then. We just kind of dug into the stories because they ran out of a slightly different model for World War II. And I'll pass it around, but it's, you had to wear this for a couple hours, you'd feel it. I know we have lots of sitting room, but it's pretty amazing how heavy this thing is. If it doesn't seem that heavy, think about wearing it for a while. And by the way, look at the gas mask. You see that? Does that look familiar to you? Gee, I wonder if there'd be some character in a movie in the mid-1970s that will basically be a German World War I soldier with a gas mask. Have you seen Star Wars? Have you seen Darth Vader? That's a German World War I, and George Lucas copies it directly. Here's the American/British helmet. And it's so old, leather kind of hard to rock. So these are British soldiers. Those are Americans practicing through gas. They use tear gas. Here's a couple of Germans with gas masks and gas masks for the mule. Here's the thing. It did not break the stalemate. The different kind of gases, phosgene was the worst. You literally rip apart your lungs. I know we're passing helmets all around. You said right there. But here's one gas you do need to know. The most widely used gas was another German invention called mustard gas. Mustard gas, kind of yellowish, and they always say it smelled like a rotten egg, or for whatever reason they call it mustard gas. And the reason why mustard gas was so awful, it wasn't the most deadly, but it was heavier than air. Heavier than air. It would get into the trenches, and it was a blistering agent. If it got on your skin, it began in enough potency, it would begin to eat away your skin. And so it just caused these horrible burns. But that's not the bad part. If it can eat your skin, imagine what it would do to your eyes. Literally begin to eat your eyes up. And being blinded by mustard gas was a common wound in World War I. Or, if it does that to your eyes, what's it going to do to your lungs? So mustard gas would be a horrible weapon. The United States would make millions of gallons of this in World War II, but both sides decided for the most part not to use it because it was so ineffective. The U.S. would help a country called Iraq purchase this in the 1980s and use it on their own civilians. And then the U.S. would use that later to justify attacking Iraq. We have an interesting world. But here's, that's an American soldier. See the blisters from the mustard gas? I guess the pain, that chemical burn is just unreal, how bad that hurts. Here's French soldiers firing a mustard round. And these are British soldiers blinded, being led back to the front. Adolf Hitler was blinded by mustard gas and was in a hospital when the war ended. And this would actually have a big deal for him. He never saw the collapse of the German army. And so he had a memory that German army seemed to be really strong. Here's dog with one and horse one. But here's the big thing. If gas wasn't effective on the battlefront, what about as a weapon of terror on civilians? And the plan was for 1919 for the Allies to use millions of gallons of mustard gas to drop on German cities. They could reach German cities by air by 1919 in the West. Big cities like Cologne or Hamburg or Bremen. And once now it never actually happened, but the Allies made the logical jump. It's okay to use gas against civilians because we have no choice. Once you make up your mind that it's okay to do that, in the next war, won't it be okay to use other horrific weapons against civilians? They didn't use gas for the most part, but they're going to use white phosphorus. Do you know what white phosphorus is? White phosphorus, it's a phosphorus with a few other chlorine, a few things mixed in, but when it gets in the air, it burns. So it runs out of oxygen. And in fact, if you dump water on it, it burns faster because there's oxygen in the water. This is a horrible incendiary. If you get white phosphorus on you, it will burn all the way through you. You have all this oxygen in your blood. It just soaks that up. It's a horrific chemical weapon. It's technically banned now, but the U.S. just rebranded it and used it against Iraq in 2003. We're still using it probably. They call it fuel air munition. You know what napalm is? It was invented in World War II. Jelly gasoline that burns until it runs out of fuel. And they use that against civilians. Once you make the logical step that total war justifies using these against civilians, it's a pretty easy step to justify using an atomic bomb. When Japan was already defeated, but not going to surrender the way we exactly wanted them to. We're going to drop 2 of them. It's a big deal. Let's get to the next one. Oh, there's my tattoo. I just have to get a tattoo of isn't that pretty? I know, tattoos are still a big deal, so think about it. Yeah, that's on someone's leg, and that might be the worst thing I've ever seen. But it's not. I'll have another tattoo for you down the road. So, number 2, Starvation Blockade. And there have been, and unrestricted submarine warfare. So I'll get to that, both of them. They fit. Okay, there have been sieges to starve enemy out to not let them, to try to kill them. But the Starvation Blockade is a political weapon to use as a cudgel to force the enemy to do things. This was a new deal. And with technology being more, and the larger numbers of people, this can affect entire countries. And the reason why I put this map up here, when the war began, Britain got nearly 80% of their food. 80% of the food were exports on ships. Germany, 40%. But they also got almost all of their fertilizer from the United States and South America on ships. If you could cut that off, there could be mass starvation. So the Allies began a blockade immediately when the war began. And where was the blockade? The British put it way out here, stopping any ship that's coming here and also here, into Germany. They also blockaded here, then here. Any ship, if it had anything that could help the enemy. And what could help the enemy? Anything. So what they do, they cut off food. And by 1916, there were going to be food riots in Germany. Now, I told you about at the Hague, they came up with these kind of things to make war more humane. If you're blockading, you're supposed to stop a ship, board it, search for quarantine, which means anything, and if they have it, escort it to a friendly port, or allow the crew to get on lifeboats and sink. The British could do that. Out here, they have a powerful fleet. Germany has a powerful fleet, but half as big as Britain, so Britain can do that. And that's what they did. And this is going to lead to over 700,000 German civilians starving to death. Starvation is a form of terror that's hard to even wrap our mind around. 2016, they called it the turnip winter. It's a really bad winter. Shortage of foods, and turnip became the main diet, especially in cities. This is a bakery that was attacked because people were literally starving, so there's militia in front. This is 1918. That's a horse that died in the street for lack of fodder, and people just swarmed out to cut off pieces of the horse. That's how hungry they were. And yes, that's the guts and intestines and everything. And trust me, that'll be gone soon. They'll take every bit of it. Starvation. And the Allies kept the blockade going, get this down, for 6 months after the war ended, to force the Germans to sign the treaty. They're going to call this the starvation generation in Germany. And they will never forget. Now, Germany didn't have the Navy to do that to Britain. But they began to use a new weapon. Submarines, they called it Unterseeboats or U-boats. And they, realizing how vulnerable submarines are, they started sinking without warning. What do we call sinking without warning? Unrestricted submarine warfare. Because submarines are really vulnerable, especially back then. They can only stay underwater for about 20 hours, so they run out of oxygen. And submarines' only defense, this is World War I submarine, is submerging. But if they get one hole in them, they really can't submerge. Well, let me rephrase that. Oh, they can submerge. They just can't come back up. By the way, submarines, oh, that'd be tough. If the enemy sinks you, there's no survival. It's awful. And so what Germany decided, it's too risky to surface and sink ships. They thought if we could knock out a bunch of ships before they get to Britain in 1915, by sinking every ship they said that came to this area. Now they didn't have enough submarines, but they put submarines right here. They started sinking British ships, literally in sight of the shore. They're going to the big port in the middle. But in 1915, this one you have to get down. They sunk the passenger liner, the Lusitania. So you have to have the Lusitania. But it's passenger liner. Now the Germans warned that they're going to sink every ship, but 1,200 people, including almost 200 Americans, died. All right, I didn't quite get as far as I wanted, but that's life. I will finish this tomorrow. And don't forget, DBQ, please look at it. If you have any questions, please ask. The DBQ will not be Monday. I'm going to give you, I want to do it probably Tuesday or Thursday. And it'll be part of your test. On that note, have a great day. Goodbye. I'll see all of you Monday.